Much like everyone else that grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, video games have been a part of my life ever since I was a little kid. I remember my older brother getting a PS2 for Christmas in 2003, and my other brother and I would hijack it whenever he wasn't around, like the annoying little brothers that we were. I also have vivid memories of playing our Game Boys under our covers at night until our parents caught on and started making us put them up. And honestly, some of my favorite childhood memories are of my brother and I waking up early and taking turns on the PS2 playing the games that we loved until our older brother kicked us off. On top of that, I'll never forget when my mom brought home a certain Monsters Inc. game for the PC on Halloween, and I absolutely adored it. So ranging everywhere from handheld devices, consoles, and the computer, please join me as we take a look back at some of my favorite games from my childhood. The first game we're going to take a look at is Monsters Inc. Scare Island. It was first released for the computer on October 29th, 2001 before being ported to the PlayStation 1 and 2 as Monsters Inc. Scream Team just a few months later. Now, this game will always hold a place in my heart, and I have fond memories of playing it on the computer at my mom's house whenever it was her week to have me. The gameplay was solid for the time period, and the story was pretty straightforward. Sully and Mike were handpicked by Waternoose to train on his private facility in order to become his top 2 scarers. The player can choose to swap between characters as they make their way through the tutorial and eventually move on to the heart of Scare Island. The island is separated into 3 training grounds: the city, the desert, and the Arctic. Each training ground has 4 different levels in which the player can earn a bronze, silver, and gold medal for completing different tasks throughout the level. A bronze medal can be earned by scaring 5 robots called the Nerds, and a silver medal can be earned by collecting all monster tokens within the level. When a player collects all of the monster tokens within a level, an extra nerd is spawned in, which will then grant the player a gold medal upon scaring it. Whenever a player completes a training ground, they have to win a race against Randall in order to unlock power-ups that enable the player to go back and access certain areas in the levels that were previously inaccessible. For example, completing the city training grounds unlocks the trampolines, and completing the desert training grounds unlocks a speed walk. All in all, I had an absolute blast playing this game as a kid and still occasionally play through it whenever I'm feeling nostalgic. It's incredibly fun, it's got a banger soundtrack, and it serves as a nice prequel to Monsters Inc. So with that being said, let's move on to the next game. The second game we're going to talk about is Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights. It was first released for the PlayStation 2 on May 20th, 2002, followed by a GameCube and Xbox release a few months later. Now, this was actually one of the first games I played for any console, and I vividly remember my brother and I taking turns playing it down in the basement of our old house on our older brother's PS2 while he was at school. The premise of the game is that Scooby and the gang are investigating monsters that have been terrorizing a local town. They meet up with Daphne's friend at a mystic manor to help solve the disappearance of her uncle. Now everyone except for Scooby ends up getting kidnapped by a specter called the Mastermind, and the player spends the game trying to locate the gang and solve the mystery. In order to progress through the game, the player must collect a certain amount of Scooby snacks in order to unlock and explore new areas. The areas include navigating Scooby through graveyards, haunted crypts, a hedge maze, a sea pier, fishing canneries, and the haunted Mystic Manor. As the player progresses through the levels, they can earn power-ups and collect monster tokens that can then be used to display villains from the TV show in the Monster Gallery room in the Mystic Manor. This game is an absolute thrill ride from start to finish. It's a classic Scooby-Doo tale wrapped in a nicely packaged video game that contains wonderful voice acting, a fun and spooky story, and graphics that still hold up surprisingly well for the time period. In my opinion, this is one of those games that's just as good as the TV show, if not better. And with that being said, let's move on to the next game. The third game on our list is Tony Hawk's Underground. Released on October 27th, 2003, Tony Hawk's Underground serves us a game that tells the story of every teenage skateboarder's dream, becoming a famous skater simply for the love of the sport. You're able to customize your character before jumping into the world of skating and trying to earn a sponsorship. Your friend, Eric, videotapes everything for you until he gets jealous, betrays you, and tries to wipe you from any competition or sponsor that he's a part of. I remember watching our older brother play and having him show us how to get all the secret tapes, along with having us play split screen with him showing us how to do certain tricks. I have vivid memories skating around the maps and slapping my brothers off their skateboards and having them return the favor. There are endless tricks to learn in this game, the gameplay is smooth as butter, and there's even an alternate ending that plays out once the player completes the story twice. I think it's fair to say that Tony Hawk's Underground set the standard for skating games moving forward, and the sequel, Tony Hawk's Underground 2, was just as good as the first game. With that being said, guys, let's move on to the next one. The fourth game I grew up with is a certified hood classic that you're sorely missing out on if you've never played it. Not only is it widely regarded as one of, if not the best SpongeBob game ever made, it also has a cult following and also spawned a rehydrated version in 2020. I am, of course, talking about the Battle for Bikini Bottom. It was first released on October 29th, 2003, and although it was ported to the PC and Game Boy Advance, my brother and I played it religiously on the PS2, much to our older brother's annoyance. The storyline is pretty much what you'd expect to see in any SpongeBob episode. Plankton has made an army of robots that have gone rogue, and it's up to the player to defeat them and save Bikini Bottom. Much like in Night of 100 Frights, the player must collect a certain number of shiny objects and golden spatulas in order to unlock new areas and progress through the game. On top of that, the player can collect hidden socks that are spread throughout the game and can be returned to Patrick in exchange for more golden spatulas. Battle for Bikini Bottom is an absolute blast from start to finish, and I have replayed it countless times over the years. The puzzles are fun, well, except for that one Mermalayer puzzle. We all know which one I'm talking about. Each level has its own ambient and unique soundtrack, and it always brings pleasure to smash robots right after they laugh at you. It's also really cool that you get to play as different characters that have special abilities, such as Patrick's throwing ice or a watermelon, and Sandy's rope swinging. In fact, the original 2003 version was so good, a rehydrated version was spawned in 2020 that not only did the OG version justice, but it included a new multiplayer mode and unused content that was scrapped from the original. Honestly though, whether you're playing the 2003 release or the rehydrated version, it doesn't really matter because you're going to have fun either way. And if you're one of those people that haven't played Battle for Bikini Bottom yet, I would strongly suggest giving it a go for yourself and seeing what all the hype is about, because in my humble opinion, it is more than worth it. And with that being said, let's move on to game number 5. So the next games I'm going to talk about are kind of a 2-for-1 deal. The next games are going to be Cartoon Network Speedway and Cartoon Network Block Party. These are games that were released on the Game Boy Advance in 2003 and 2004, and when my dad and stepmom got tired of hearing our older brother complain about our constant takeover of his PS2, our parents decided to get my brother and I both a Game Boy Advance SP for Christmas in 2004. I remember getting the blue one while my brother got the silver one, and I got Cartoon Network Speedway, and my brother got Cartoon Network Block Party. They're both extremely straightforward and play out exactly as they sound. Cartoon Network Speedway is a basic Mario Kart style racing game that includes all of the characters from Cartoon Network racing against each other in little mini go-karts. And Cartoon Network Block Party is essentially an electronic board game filled with mini-games and challenges. My brother and I had a blast playing Speedway and Block Party up until our older brother deemed it appropriate to start introducing us to more multiplayer games, which actually leads us into game number 6. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas.
All we had to do was follow the damn train, CJ. All we had to do was follow the damn train, CJ. All we had to do was follow the damn train, CJ.
Now, this was a game that I mostly remember watching my brothers play because they knew how to make it funny and I was still learning how to use controls at the time. But regardless, it's still a core memory and a great game that provided a lot of laughs and joy to myself and others across the world. Released on October 26, 2004, San Andreas follows the story of Carl, or CJ, as he returns to Los Santos after losing his mother in a drive-by. CJ reunites with his old crew, and the player progresses through the story by completing missions and doing favors for people in a typical Grand Theft Auto style. I remember sitting in my stepmother's daycare and watching my brothers beat up rival members and their lady before cruising around Los Santos and running over everybody in the process. Not only is the story full of twists and turns, but the gameplay is good, the voice acting is on par, and the PS2 graphics help immerse the player in a totally different world where they can do anything they want. Not only that, but this game spawned a generation of memes and references that people still frequently use today. Anytime I pull up to a fast food restaurant, it takes everything in me to not blurt out Big Smoke's order.
I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda.
It's safe to say that this game is one of those that'll be played for generations to come, and still provides a nice taste of nostalgia for anyone that grew up playing it. So with that being said, let's move on to game number 7. The 7th game we're going to take a look at is Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. This is the 3rd installment in the Ratchet & Clank series, and it's a game that I still hold near and dear to me today. It was my introduction to the Ratchet & Clank games, and I remember our older brother showing us how to play and having the two of us on a team while he played solo. Now admittedly, he whooped us almost every time, but we still had a blast trying to destroy his base in multiplayer mode. But whenever our older brother wasn't around, my other brother and I would take control and play through the story missions of the campaign. The game was released for the PS2 on November 2nd, 2004, and the storyline consists of Ratchet, Clank, and the Galactic Rangers trying to hunt down an evil robot named Dr. Nefarious. Dr. Nefarious has ordered an invasion on Ratchet's home planet and is set on wiping all forms of life from the universe and creating an army of robots, and it's up to the player to stop him. The player then progresses through the levels in a typical Ratchet & Clank fashion by defeating enemies with their wrench and unique weapons. The weapons can be unlocked and purchased from vendors after collecting bolts from fallen enemies and destroying boxes. The player can also purchase upgraded versions of their weapons once they level them up enough by defeating enemies. Another cool aspect of the game is the skill points players can earn by completing certain tasks, which can then be used to unlock cheats for the game. A similar aspect can be seen with the hidden titanium bolts throughout the game, which can then be used to purchase skins for Ratchet. Besides having a blast playing Ratchet & Clank with my brothers and spending hours in the sewers gathering the crystals, this game also helped me feel like my brothers were still around when my dad and their mom got divorced in 2009. While my dad dealt with his divorce and other issues in his own way, I turned back to playing the video games that I grew up playing with my brothers, and it made the house seem a lot less empty whenever I was alone. And with that being said, let's move on to the next game. The 8th game we're going to take a look at is one of my favorite racing games of all time, Need for Speed Most Wanted. Now, before I go any further, I do want to say that I was also going to originally include Underground 2 in this list. However, as much as I love that game, I have far more memories of playing Most Wanted than I do with Underground 2, so that's what we're going to focus on today. I'll quickly give Underground 2 its well-deserved credit because it is an awesome game, but now we're going to move on. Need for Speed Most Wanted was released for the PS2 in November of 2005, followed by an Xbox 360 release for the following month in December. The story takes place in the fictional city of Rockport, and the player arrives full swing in their flashy BMW M3 GTR. After knocking out a few races and beating a few rivals, they're able to challenge Razor, a racer on the blacklist. Towards the end of the race, the player loses by default due to Razor and his goons messing with your car. The player then gets arrested, and Razor uses their car to climb to the top of the blacklist. After getting released from jail, the player then spends the game completing races and challenges while getting chased by the police. When the player gains enough notoriety, they're able to challenge a blacklist racer and claim their spot on the blacklist until they eventually climb their way to the top, challenge Razor again, and get their flashy BMW back. When a player defeats a rival, they're able to select 2 of 3 random markers, with one of them holding a pink slip to the said rival's car. It's a cool little bonus that gives the player a reason to go back and replay the game to try and collect the cars of all the blacklist racers. I know for a fact my brothers and I spent countless hours trying to do so while growing up, and I still have a blast playing this game every time I feel nostalgic and decide to play through it. The soundtrack is excellent, the gameplay is smooth, and the graphics transport me right back to the mid-2000s. For a game that's now 20 years old, Need for Speed Most Wanted still delivers an incredible adrenaline rush that stays unmatched and still has me holding my breath during intense races and police chases. If you haven't played it yet, you're truly missing out. And with that being said, let's move on to game number 9. The next game we're going to talk about is a rather hidden gem in my humble opinion. Cold Winter was released for the PS2 on May 10th, 2005, and it actually serves as my introduction to first-person shooter games. I remember our older brother coming home from GameStop one day and excitedly telling us to come downstairs so we could play together. And after exploring all of the maps in multiplayer and having a blast testing out all the guns, we settled in and watched our older brother begin the campaign. Now unfortunately, we never got to watch him finish the campaign for reasons I can't remember, but what I do remember is buying this game for my own PS2 in 2009 after our parents divorced, and I finally finished the main storyline one night while my dad was out drinking with his buddies. You play as a former British SAS soldier named Andrew Sterling who was captured and jailed in Chang political prison before being rescued by former acquaintances that are now working for a private security company. You join forces and start completing missions in order to prevent a guy named Gray from detonating a nuclear bomb to create a cold winter that would terrify society of nuclear warfare. The gameplay of Cold Winter can very easily be compared to the early days of Call of Duty. The player battles their way through levels and ends them by completing the objectives. There's a variety of different map designs, along with a nice selection of weapons that can be found or picked up from enemies, which brings the game alive and makes it feel incredibly immersive. The gameplay also holds up for the time period, being smooth and providing the charm of PS2 graphics. Cold Winter is a fun, thrilling, action-packed first-person shooter that helps set the standard for those types of games going forward. And with that being said, let's move on to game number 10. The last game we're going to talk about in this video is one that I still hold near and dear to me to this day, and it's called RuneScape. You may have heard of it. It's been around for over 20 years now, and is one of the biggest MMORPG games out there. One of my absolute favorite memories is during spring break of 2006, when our older brother gathered my other brother and I and walked us to the public library that was right down the road from our house. When we got there, we logged into the computers and he helped us create our own accounts and guided us through the tutorial island. I remember picking out a name very similar to my older brother's account, and although he teased me a bit for it, he confirmed to me a few weeks ago that it actually meant a lot to him how he had such a big influence on me and how I wanted to take after him. After landing in Lumbridge, he helped show us the basic areas to cook, fish, mine, and smith armor. We then completed the cook's assistant quest, along with a few other easy ones, before being kicked off the library computers for going over our 2-hour limits. And from that day forward, my addiction to RuneScape was born. And the thing about RuneScape is that you don't really quit. You just take extended breaks. You know what I'm saying? But with that being said, guys, that is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for stopping by. I sincerely hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope even more to see you in the next one. Alright, take it easy, guys.